This session is a collaboration between the FYI and MAS-ICNA. The FYI is known as the Family and Youth Institute. It is a mental health research and education institute that strengthens and empowers individuals, families, and communities by promoting youth development, healthy marriages, effective parenting, and mental health and well-being. There are many other sessions with the FYI speakers, so if you keep an eye out, and inshallah you can join them as well. I personally am involved with the Family and Youth Institute as a researcher and community educator, and I'm grateful by the qadr of Allah that we are brought here today to share some of the knowledge that we have been working through our research, and we're very happy to share with you all. Some quick housekeeping items. The FYI has a research study on Muslim youth and character development, which our speaker will talk a little bit more about. We encourage parents to sign up for their youth, and if there are any youth, please sign up with a QR code. We can put that up on the screen. And be sure also to join us on social media. You can just use the QR codes, very quick and easy, to get resources and access the new and latest research that we do. And be sure to join us, on social media. I recommend everyone to take notes, share reflections, and tag #TheFYI on Facebook or Instagram so we can collectively learn, grow, and ignite change in your social network as well. Finally, please send your questions using the MAS-ICNA app, as we will pull the questions from there to ask the speakers at the end of the session. So for our first speaker, Hanan Hashem, Dr. Hanan Hashem is a researcher and community educator of the Family and Youth Institute. She is also a faculty fellow at William James College in Boston. She completed her master's in quantitative methods and PhD in counseling psychology from the University of Texas in Austin. Dr. Hashem recently completed her pre-doctoral internship at the Center for Multicultural Training of Psychology at Boston Medical Center, Boston University. Dr. Hashem's main interests are in research, clinical and community work. Her current research focuses on contextual factors that influence American Muslim youth development, including the role of their racial, religious, and gender identities in their everyday experiences. Regarding her clinical work, Dr. Hashem has completed training at various sites, including university counseling centers, a youth shelter, a community health center, and community health centers. Dr. Hashem is also a community organizer and has focused her efforts on youth empowerment through local youth groups, regional camps and conferences, as well as serving as an educator and mental health consultant for varying institutions. Please help me welcome Dr. Hanan Hashem.
All right, assalamu alaikum everybody. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. All right, let's get started. So today, inshallah, we're going to talk about unveiling abusive relationships, and particularly within families. I want to just take a moment and just recognize that this is a pretty heavy topic. It's a pretty difficult topic, I think, for many of us to sit with and recognize and identify what are the types of relationships that we're in. And today, inshallah, we're going to break down a few different types of relationship challenges and dynamics. And you might see yourself in some of these, whether as the person with more power or the person with less power, inshallah. So I want you to just take a moment to breathe, relax, and renew your intentions. But one of the things that we get trained, as psychologists at least, is to have a non-judgmental attitude, to recognize that our roles and our responsibilities and our relationships with the people around us is oftentimes fluid, right? Sometimes we're really nice and kind and the best Muslim that we can be, and then sometimes we're the ones making mistakes and need to do the repairing in the relationship. So just as a reminder, this is hosted by the Family and Youth Institute, which is a national research and education institute focusing on Muslim mental health and family wellness. Alhamdulillah, I've been part of the Family and Youth Institute as a speaker for the last I want to say about 10 years, alhamdulillah, and I absolutely love this organization. I highly recommend you visit our website, check out our resources. We have a table outside as well with a bunch of resources and our focus areas, including mental health, parenting, youth, and marriage. So just a disclaimer, while I am a psychologist and I am a therapist, this is not going to be therapy. This is for educational purposes. This is also not designed to address individual problems. Now, in your questions, feel free to ask specific questions, and I'll be here afterwards, inshallah, and I'm happy to talk with folks. But this talk itself, you might see yourself in it. Inshallah, you do. I really want to make sure it's applicable to most people. But what we're going to do really is scratch the surface on unveiling abusive relationships within family dynamics. So we're going to do 3 things in my short time, inshallah, here today. The first is, sorry, I just need to put my timer. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to just briefly talk about the diversity of families. What do I mean by family? Am I just talking about like parents and children? The answer is no. The families are very diverse and very large and very blended. The second thing we're going to do is talk about the types of challenging dynamics. And what I'm going to do actually is we're going to tease apart the difference between stressful relationships, toxic relationships, and abusive relationships so that you can really tell the difference and be able to identify solutions for the different types of relationships that exist within families. And then lastly, I'm going to give you 3 kind of practical strategies or areas to identify in terms of navigating abusive relationships specifically, inshallah. All right, so when it comes to the diversity of Muslim families, I'm sure that if I just sat here and went through each person in this room, you're going to tell me about a different family dynamic that you have, right? And the most kind of basic nuclear family that we think about is parents and children, right? But sometimes we have parents and 10 children. We have parents and 1 child. We have single parent and 10 children, single parent and 2 child. We have divorced parents. We have blended families who are maybe 2 parents that got divorced, remarried to another family, but in those other like the other person that they married also had children. We're also thinking about grandparents that might be in the picture, in-laws, cousins, uncles, aunts. When we talk about the Muslim family, we're talking about a very, very complex family system that oftentimes is unfortunately not really covered in a lot of the ways that Western psychology teaches about what families are. And then, of course, although it's a contentious topic, we also have families where a Muslim man is married to multiple wives, right, which also exists and also might be part of the family dynamics that exist also in this room. So I just want to recognize that there's a lot of different ways that family dynamics can show up. I am curious though, did I miss any other family dynamic or family system that you might belong to? All right, no hands up means I did a great job, thank you. Okay, so within these diversity of family systems, one of the things that I want y'all to think about is the relationship between when I talk about the types of bismillah. When I talk about the types of challenging dynamics, I want y'all to remember that in these dynamics, what I'm talking about mostly is going to be about 2 people interacting with one another. So it might be a wife and her mother-in-law. It might be the dad and the youngest daughter. It might be the relationship between 2 partners. It might be the relationship between an in-law and another in-law. The in-law of the 2 in-law families, right? So bear with me for 1 second. I'm just going to try to change the way that this is shown on the screen. Okay, so what is the difference between a stressful, a toxic, and an abusive relationship? So I want y'all to think about 3 different parts here. We're going to talk about duration, safety, and power. So a stressful relationship is actually incredibly normal and actually kind of healthy to have in your life. It's important to have stressful relationships. Sometimes I think a lot about how, some of us live in an era or in spaces where we just want everything to kind of be easy. We don't want any conflicts. We don't want anything wrong to be happening. But the reality is, if you are an individual with a personality and you are around another individual with also a personality, there's going to be times and places where the end and the beginning of your personality is going to meet the end and beginning of their personality. So whether that is your best friend, whether that's your partner, whether that is your child, whether that is your parents, there are times where you're going to come and butt heads with one another. And so a stressful relationship is when the issue is time limited and there is no violation of safety. So for example, you might have a family system where the father may have lost his job, right? Losing your job is incredibly stressful, and it impacts the relationship that a person has with the people around them. And so because, for example, the father may have lost his job, it may be the case that it's impacting his identity and his sense of self, and that might come in the way that he's communicating or his sensitivity to the way that his family is treating him. Right? And so there might be like some stress there, but the thing about stressful relationships is that they're time limited, right? And so if you're able to kind of talk it through, you're able to identify like, hey, what you did here was actually really hurtful, or I actually really didn't like that, and the person is able to maneuver and change, then the stressful relationship becomes no longer a stressful relationship. Now the reality though is that stress in relationships can exist for years, right? I've worked with folks who have had, for example, a couple who had a really hard time having a child. And the infertility within couples is a really big issue that we actually don't talk about. In families, there's a lot of grieving that happens, grieving about something that you weren't able to have, something that you imagined. And so now you're trying to figure out, like, how do I do this thing? But then also all of the it's very costly to try to then have a child if you're having infertility issues, etc. That might be something that a family or a couple or a family system is going through for years, right? But it still kind of falls within the stressful category. Now, when we talk about toxic relationships, what we're talking about here is a pattern in a relationship. And I want you to think about like an infinity sign. Like this. So it's a patterned relationship where one person is triggering or is like doing something that really bothers the other person. There is some level of power dynamic that's happening. Sometimes safety is violated, right? So for example, a very common dynamic we see between couples, and if you're here tomorrow, by the way, I highly recommend you come to our session on intergenerational trauma, where I will talk in more detail about attachment styles. But you might have a couple, for example, that has two different attachment styles. One is a little bit avoidant and one is a little bit anxious. This is a very common dynamic we see between couples, where as one person, for example, feels very stressed out, they want to hide, they don't want to talk, they shut down, but as the other person in the relationship gets stressed out, they want to talk through it, they want to be engaged, but the other person is like disappearing, and so then you have kind of this pattern, and each person is feeling hurt, but for very kind of polar opposite reasons, right? So then you have like this pattern of toxicity where, for example, one partner might say something that's really mean or might say something that's really hurtful as a way to get the other person's attention or as a way to push the other person away. So there's some level of safety that's being violated. There's some power dynamic that may exist. But the thing about toxic relationships is that because it's a pattern behavior, it becomes toxic when there needs to be an outside intervention that comes in and says, hey, this is not okay, right? You might see this, for example, in relationships between mothers and their daughters, especially daughters around teenage age. One of the things that we know about adolescent development and young folks' development is that around the time in middle school and high school, there is a peak in a lot of really stressful internal changes that are happening, both on a biological level, but also on an emotional level. And so, for example, one of the things that young people really want to do and start doing around that time is they want to become their own person. And if you come from an immigrant family where you do not exist as your own person, that can cause a lot of conflict, right? And so then what you end up having is a parent that's feeling incredibly hurt by this child, right, in their actions, but the child is also feeling incredibly hurt and controlled and strangled by the parent. And then you have this pattern where they're both reacting to each other from a place of hurt, and they're not able to get out of that relationship. All they can see is, this is how I'm hurting, this is how you're hurting me, and I'm responding to you, and I'm trying to respond to the way that you're hurting me. So that would be a toxic relationship. And I would be very surprised if anybody in this room has not existed or does not currently exist in some level of a toxic relationship, again, given the diversity of who we are as individuals and the connectedness that we exist in a community, right? It's part of our job to be connected to one another, subhanAllah. Now, when it comes to abusive relationships, I want you to think about this infinity sign, but instead what you're going to do is you're going to twist it so that it becomes more, this is vertical. Yeah, it becomes vertical. The difference between a toxic relationship and an abusive relationship is that safety is violated and that there is a power dynamic that's happening where one person cannot get out of that toxicity, out of that relationship, out of that system, out of that pattern. And so then you have an abusive relationship where one person is exhibiting their power, is using their power over another person to violate their safety. Now, what does that look like? That looks like, of course, physical abuse, right? Physical abuse is not allowed in our deen. And I mean, I'm not a Muslim scholar, but we know that that's not allowed. We also have emotional abuse, right? Someone who's emotionally manipulating somebody and making them feel like they are not worth anything, they're worthless, they're violating them on an emotional level, they're making them think that who they are, they're making them question their sense of identity. And so there's an emotional safety that's being taken away from somebody. But again, remember, there's a power dynamic. Now, one thing that's really important to remember here is that although if we just generally thought about a family, we think parent and then children, that's not always how power works in an actual family, right? One of the signs of the Day of Judgment, subhanAllah, is that a mother is going to give birth to her master. And so sometimes, and many times, I have seen abusive relationships where the children are abusing the parents, right? Or where one parent is using a child to manipulate the parent. And so you really, when you think about power dynamics and who has power and who actually can move the emotional dynamics of a family, you want to think about that as power. Who can actually move the family and really create chaos? Like if they say something, then everything changes, right? Who is the person in your family whose everybody else is operating based off of their emotional state, right? It might be a mom, it might be the dad, it might be the older sibling, right? When the older sibling is in the space, I see some of you making eye contact with people around you. You already know what I'm talking about. It might be an in-law, right? You already know when this person is here, we just have to adhere to whatever they say, and nobody else can say anything or move in any way. We all have to. So that person then has power, right? Who is taking the most emotional space in a room, right? One of a very common archetype that I see is actually a individual who, on the outside, everybody actually just feels bad for them because maybe they're very ill, maybe they just haven't had a lot of luck in their life, but because everybody feels bad for them, everybody else in the family system then starts to revolve around that person completely to the point that everybody else's needs are not being met, right? So you want to be very careful and very, very aware of who is taking up the most space in our emotional lives, subhanAllah. So stressful relationships, time limited, safety not really violated. There could be a power dynamic, but it's not being used. Toxic relationship, you're stuck in a pattern, right, where both people are hurting each other, both people are contributing. The power dynamic, there could be a power dynamic, but it's not really being used. Abusive relationship, safety is being violated. And there is a power dynamic where the safety is being violated because using that power, subhanAllah. Okay, so let's talk about some of the strategies for navigating these challenging relationships. Thank you. Y'all already see how there's no way that we can really talk about in depth all of these things. So again, I'm just gonna remind you, I have another talk tomorrow about intergenerational trauma if you wanna hear it more, inshallah. So when it comes to strategies for navigating challenging relationships, I want you to think about these three things. And I know that the word boundaries can actually be really tricky and controversial to talk about, so we'll talk a little bit about what that is. So there's boundaries, communication, and accountability. Those are the three things I want you to think about in regards to strategies. When it comes to boundaries, now, if you come from certain parts of the world, and if you are a woman, then you learn that you are supposed to sacrifice everything about yourself for your family. Your sense of space, your money, your time, your energy, your effort. You exist only for your family, right? And so it becomes this idea of boundaries, I find, is especially difficult for women. It's especially difficult for women to identify, wait. Who am I and what is my relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Your relationship with everybody else around you is supposed to center Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And so it becomes then your responsibility to create boundaries in your life so that your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not being violated. That should be the center of all of your relationships, family and otherwise, and your relationship with this world as well. So when it comes to boundaries, there are God-given boundaries. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has already given us boundaries about who is allowed in our space, who is allowed in our physical space, in our emotional space, right? We have a hadith about like not walking into somebody's room after Isha time, for example. We actually have boundaries. So I really encourage everybody to tap into your local shuyukh, tap into your local Islamic scholars to identify like what are the boundaries that that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells me to maintain. So then there's God-given boundaries, and then you have your personal boundaries given your own personal history and your personality, right? For example, some of you might be folks who are very touchy-feely, right? You just want to give everybody a hug all the time, right? But some of you are like, please don't touch me, right? You might be the parent, you might be the child, you might be the sibling or the mom, whatever. You're like, can you two steps away, please, right? And that's okay. But what's important then is the communication piece. One of the things that I find is that some people know what their boundaries are, but they just expect the people around them to know it. Whether it's your parents, whether it's your child, whether it's your in-laws. Because again, the reality is not only do we come from different backgrounds culturally, right? So you have two people who got married from two different cultures. But also, if you exist, we have different cultures. Even if you are from the same city, from the same town, if you exist in two different families, you have two different cultures in those families. What is okay in one family is not okay in another family. And so being able to then communicate instead of expecting people to just know this is what it is going to become very, very important. And of course, then we have, and I teach, one of the classes that I teach is lifespan development, and I teach about the cultures that exist within generations. And subhanAllah, with media and with technology, what we're finding, or what I'm finding, I should say, is that there becomes actually a larger and larger gap between generations. It's actually becoming harder and harder to talk to the next generation because you feel like they come from a different world. And so it becomes then extra important to have shared language, to have shared language and to be able to push through those language and cultural barriers. Again, you might even be from the same family, but if you come from a different generation, you have a different culture. Right? You might be from the same family, but your older sibling, the oldest and the youngest, have very different experiences of the same family, right? And so being able to identify what are my boundaries, how do I communicate those boundaries across the cultures? I want you to really think about culture as what are the values and beliefs and things that I want for myself that I know to be true, and being able to understand that every single person from this room has like a different worldview, a different understanding of how the world works. And again, I want to just point to technology as another way that each one of us are now existing in our own personalized little worlds. So even now, sometimes we use language that maybe all the people that you follow on Instagram are using that language, but the person you're sitting next to at dinner time is not using the same language. So then it becomes important to translate for the people around you and really push yourself to talk and communicate. And then lastly, when it comes to abusive relationships, it is imperative that we hold individuals accountable. One of the hardest things that I find, is that, and subhanAllah, this is I think, just something that we really have to think about is, what is the balance between compassion and accountability? What is the balance Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it gives us as examples between mercy and justice, right? We have a balance in our faith, right? You do something wrong, you're going to be held accountable for it. And so how are we then modeling that within our own family systems and our own dynamics? And accountability sometimes looks like getting it from something outside of the family system, especially if there is abuse involved. Now, I'm going to just end here at the lecture. We can talk way more about this. I'm very happy to answer any questions, but inshallah that's been helpful. Just as a reminder, the Family Youth Institute, we have many toolkits, infographics, videos that talk about this and other topics as well. And please follow us on social media, and I'll turn it to Ada. Jazakallah khairan.
Jazakallah khair, Dr. Hanan, for informing us on the signs of abuse and what mistreatment looks like in a lot of our family homes, unfortunately. We're going to turn it over to Brother Younis Lateef, who will talk about developing characters and positive and healthy treatments in the home. Brother Younis Lateef has over 20 years of experience servicing the Houston Muslim community, including leadership positions within MAS, Scouts, and MAS Youth. He currently serves as the chaplain advisor for MAS Scouting, Unit 713 in Houston, Texas. In his book, Cultivating Character, he leverages his experience to share a practical guide to instilling Islam in scouting or youth group curricula. By trade, he is a life coach, change management professional, and holds an MBA from the University of Texas at Austin, and I am under the impression that he will be doing a book signing at the table by the MAS Publishing table. And I want to remind you guys to send your questions on the app, and if not, you guys can ask inshallah afterwards. So help me welcome Brother Younis.
Jazakallah khairan, sister. Okay. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. So Dr. Hanan's topic was very heavy in nature. So inshallah this is going to be a little bit lighter in nature, but we're going to focus on communicating with your child, with your son or daughter, and how can you use the power of questions to connect yourself with your children by connecting them to the deen. So the fitna, the challenges that your children face are real. As the Family Youth Institute conducted many research studies, here's one here, a couple of them here, that you can see that 59% of our Muslim youth are viewing pornography. 78% of our Muslim college students have participated in two of these vices: premarital sex, illicit drugs, marijuana, a number of other drugs. And when I looked at this list, I didn't see dating and I didn't see lying. And this was done back in 2014. So imagine how challenging life is today for our youth. That's why I like Frederick Douglass's quote here: "It is easier to build strong children than to repair broken men." So it's very important that we start early in our character development with our children. So alhamdulillah, with the blessing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the help of MAS Publishing, I was able to publish a book called Cultivating Character: An Islamic Lens to Scout Law. This book was published in the mind, I wrote it with the scout master in mind, the scout leaders and the youth worker in mind, to help them develop the young Muslim's identity by connecting them to the deen. But what I learned, this book is not only for scout leaders and youth workers and youth mentors, but it can also be used for Islamic schools, Islamic Sunday schools, and also parents. How many of us have tried to have a family halaqah with our children and it didn't go too well, right? We didn't know where to start. This resource, inshallah, will help make that more easier. So in this book, we look at 12 characteristics, universal characteristics that we instill in our youth, from trustworthiness, a Muslim is trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, kind, and so forth, all the way to reverent. And in it, we look at it from the Islamic perspective. We not only look at Quran and Hadith, but we also share inspirational stories from our righteous predecessors, fun activities that you can do with your youth, reflection questions, dua, and a comprehensive lesson plan so that you can piece all of this together. Saves us a lot of valuable time in being able to pull together a family halaqah with very short notice. For instance, I have a family halaqah with my children, do it after Maghrib, takes a few minutes, taking one of these things, and also being able to do some of the activities as well. So let me share with you the framework. What do Allah and His Prophet ﷺ say about being trustworthy? So we have, that's one part. What does it mean again? We look at further definition of what it means to be trustworthy from the Islamic perspective. Tell me a story. So we take stories from righteous predecessors in the seerah. What's in it for me? What's in it for me looks at not only the benefit of being trustworthy in the akhirah, but also in the dunya. Let's do this. Those are those activities I talked about. Let's reflect. Those reflection questions that you can ask your youth, your children, to see if they're actually gaining, they're actually understanding, or they're actually getting it, what you're trying to teach them. In the Let's Make Dua section, we try to connect them to Allah by connecting them with authentic dua from the Prophet ﷺ. And then finally, Let's Teach It section, which I said is pulling it all together in a comprehensive curriculum. So in the remainder of this presentation, it's going to be very interactive, and I'm going to show you bits and pieces how to use the book. I'm not going to be able to do my full 1.5 hour presentation on it, but it's going to be a couple of minutes on how to use it. But what I want to start with is, how do you reflect? So if your child comes to you, you ask your children, what do you get from this presentation or from this hadith or this ayah? What are you going to tell them when they ask you, how do I reflect? This is where the audience comes in, participation. I'm going to call on people if I don't see any hands. Brother, how do you reflect?
First of all, you need to know the meaning of the words that you're reading. Like, if it's a hadith or ayah, you need to be able to understand what it means, not only reading the words itself, but take it to the second level, which is because the Arabic language has a vessel of meaning different than the English language. So that's one part of it.
Okay.
The kids who lives in America, they don't.
So let me stop you. I'm asking, what are you going to tell your child if they ask you, how do I reflect?
Language is the tool.
Language is the tool. Okay.
That's a key thing.
Brother?
I think I would say, try to fit this into
Okay. Okay. One last one. Great. Excellent. So I'll share with some examples, right? Personal experiences. Sharing personal experiences. Summarize it in your own words. Going back to the language, right? Relating stories that they've heard before from the ayat and hadith. Sharing examples. And finally, part of reflection is asking questions, right? There may other questions come up. So those are things you can tell them when you ask them, have that conversation. When they don't know how to reflect, these are some things that you can educate them on. So now we're going to do it for real, right? We're going to put it into practice. Typically, I have somebody read this. For sake of time, I'm going to go ahead and read it. So what does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam say about being friendly? We're going to look at friendly in the next few minutes here. This is the ayah from Surah Kahf. وَاصْبِرْ نَفْسَكَ مَعَ الَّذِينَ يَدْعُونَ رَبَّهُمْ بِالْغَدَاةِ وَالْعَشِيِّ يُرِيدُونَ وَجْهَهُ وَلَا تَعْدُ عَيْنَاكَ عَنْهُمْ تُرِيدُ زِينَةَ الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا. So content yourself with those who pray to their Lord morning and evening, seeking His approval, and do not let your eyes turn away from them out of desire for the attractions of this worldly life. In the hadith that follows, none of you truly believes until he loves for his brother what he loves for himself. So I need brother and a sister. What do you get from this? Share a reflection. Quick, short reflection. Sister. Removing ego, removing jealousy from your heart. Okay? And brother? What's it? Being selfless. Okay? Anyone else? Brother? Excellent. Surround yourself. Great. Everyone, excellent points. All right. Surround yourself with people that's going to be like-minded, tied to the deen, and that's going to help you be closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this, you can easily read this after Maghrib prayer or after one of prayer. Pray together and read one of these and then ask your youth, what do you get out of this? What do you reflect? What lessons can you learn from this? And hear what they say. And you can share your own reflections. This is a way to communicate and understand where they're coming from. Now this is a good one. The parents say, how's school? What does your child say? It's good, right? So when my children do this to me, I say, what's good look like? And then they have to describe what is good, right? And so then I be able to have that conversation. So let's practice again. So here in the book, I have a number of questions. The question, I know you can't read it, but in your opinion, what tears apart friendships? Need some reflections. Disrespect. What's that? Betrayal. Yes. What's that? Intolerance, not being tolerant with others. So can you see how having this conversation with your child is going to pull up things that they may be facing, they may not want to talk with you about? So you can open that line of communication. You don't necessarily have to do it with your child only. You can bring their friends together so you can see who their friends are and get to know their friends more. So there's a lot more stuff you can use to connect in the book. You have stories, like I said, from the righteous predecessor. You also have activities that you can do with them. But let's make it real here. So I'm going to take an activity from a different character, which is courage, and I'm going to challenge. I need 3 volunteers for this exercise. Can I get 3 volunteers, please? 3 volunteers. 2 minutes? Okay, we got 2 minutes, so let's do this real quick. 1, come on. 2, please come up. 3, let's go. Okay, your challenge. The few minutes we have left. Oh, 3. Who was the last? Okay. So your challenge is. Can you face the audience? I'm going to give you 30. I'm going to give you 60 seconds. What I need you to do is hold up this book with a sheet of paper using only one hand. Your hand should not be supporting the book. Okay? You got 60 seconds. Ready? Hold up this book with a sheet of paper using only one hand. Go. Don't use anything. Go ahead. No, that's you're supporting with your hands. One hand. Okay. I didn't think about that. Time's up. But you guys collaborated. So the way. Let me show you how I would. So the way you can do it is you can, oops, thank you. There's also, so, how many, do I really have a little more time? Okay, so last thing I will say is 3 takeaways. Ask questions, not yes, no questions, but questions that will, not why questions to make them feel offensive, but genuine questions to seek to understand. Engage yourself, engage your youth in conversations, and finally continue to work on yourself, because we need to continue working on ourselves to model our Prophet ﷺ. Lastly, if you have a purple snake on the right side of your seat, inshallah, you can come up to me and get a free book. Jazakallah khairan. Assalamu alaikum. Snazzy. That's fine.
So Jazakumullah khair. Thank you both for amazing speeches. Can we give them a round of applause? Alhamdulillah. We have a few more minutes for a couple of questions, and a bunch came through. Dr. Hanan is going to combine some of them and answer some of them for you, but both speakers are going to be available for questions if you guys wanted to come up and ask them afterwards.
Jazakallah khairan. I really do appreciate, I think, even in that, especially in that last activity, you can see the different ways that we work and different ways that we approach problems, subhanAllah, including relationships. So I'm just looking at some of these questions. We have some really good ones here, but what I'm going to try to do is, the really difficult thing about talking about abuse in generality, in a general way, is that I kid you not, like if one person was treated one way, it would be completely fine for them, but if you treated the same person another way, it would be considered a violation of their safety. So it becomes very difficult to kind of answer some of these questions if you're asking like, you know, what do I do if somebody's being abused? Because my psychologist mind wants to know like what is happening? In what way are they being abused? What are the boundaries? Who is it by? What is the power dynamic? What is the relationship? And so it becomes very difficult to answer some of these questions in specificity. But I will say that one of the things, and I'm going to kind of go back to my lecture around boundaries, communication, and accountability. One of the things that's really important for us to realize is that, again, I'm going to say this again, the most important thing for every single person in this room is your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I want y'all to really consider, how is your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being affected in your relationship with this other person? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave all of us, every single human being, dignity and respect. And that is something that we deserve, no matter who you are, no matter what your relationship is, no matter what your ability, disability, language you speak, where you came, how old you are, etc. And so I want to ask you, or I want you to be asking this question for yourself. If you're talking about a sibling, if you're talking about yourself, if you're talking about a friend, how is this person's dignity being violated? Now, if you're asking, like, how do I support another person that is going through this? If it's a person that's not in your family system, you really need to recognize, and this is like one of the hardest things to recognize when it comes to issues of abuse, or when you feel like you want to help with something that you see is going on around you that's wrong, right? Case in point, what's happening in Gaza, right? We all would love to be there and literally stop what's happening. We want to go and change people's mind and put pen to pencil or literally stop people from doing certain things, but we can't. And so when it comes to impacting or affecting a person that's not necessarily in your family system, you know, you want to follow our tradition around stopping it with your hand and stopping it with your tongue and then stopping it with your heart. And you need to recognize that sometimes if it's a friend and you're trying to give them advice and you're trying to move them in certain ways and they do not want to move, you cannot change a person if they do not have the motivation to move. And actually it can be even more detrimental for them if you try to remove them from a system in which, remember that cycle that I talked about? It's all connected to each other. You remove one piece in a particular way, there needs to be an entire safety plan. Right? There needs to be an entire safety plan so that person can fall. Because sometimes it becomes worse. Abuse gets worse when a person tries to to kind of just like break from that. And so that requires a lot of expertise. And so the first thing I'm going to say is to connect to experts in your community. We have, alhamdulillah, domestic violence, Muslim domestic violence, resources in our community. And so I really highly recommend that you tap into that. Now, when it comes to you or your own family member, and you are witnessing, for example, your younger sibling enduring trauma from your parents, then this is where it gets very, very tricky and very, very real. Because if you are witnessing your younger sibling, for example, and you have the means to remove them from that situation, and this is where it gets really taboo, right? Removing families, separating families, we don't do that. But if there is harm being done, we need to stop that harm. And so that's why, again, I say it becomes very careful and very tricky, and I really want to know about specificities, because you always want a family to be intact. You always want a family to be together. And so the questions are going to be, were things being communicated, right? Was there outside help? Was this person held accountable? Are all of these things not working? Then someone needs to be removed. Something needs to happen where that system is going to be changed. And so it becomes very specific to the family, and I'm happy to answer any questions, inshallah, but we are out of time, and inshallah, I hope that was helpful for you all, inshallah.
Jazakumullah khair, and thank you very much for taking those questions. Inshallah, you guys have found this to be this knowledge to be helpful to you, and may it help you beyond the conference, and inshallah, really help you empower your families, your homes.